The crystal chandeliers of the Manhattan ballroom cast dancing shadows across Marcus Holloway's face as he raised his glass of champagne, his eyes gleaming with the confidence of a man who had never lost at anything. At 35, Marcus had built an empire in commercial real estate, turning abandoned properties into luxury developments that dotted the city skyline. His success had made him arrogant, his wealth had made him careless, and his charm had made him dangerous to anyone who dared to care about him. You think you're invincible, don't you? His college friend Derek laughed, clapping him on the shoulder as the charity gala buzzed around them. I've watched you close impossible deals, win over impossible clients, seduce impossible women. But I bet there's one thing you can't do. Marcus turned to him, one eyebrow raised in amusement. The orchestra played softly in the background, and around them, New York's elite mingled in their designer gowns and tailored suits. Name it, he said, his voice carrying that trademark arrogance that had become his signature. Derek gestured toward a woman standing near the buffet table, laughing with a group of volunteers. She wore a simple navy dress that did nothing to hide her fuller figure, and her curly brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. There was something genuine about her smile, something unguarded that seemed out of place in this room full of calculated expressions and strategic networking. Her name is Sarah Chen, Derek said quietly. She runs a nonprofit that helps homeless families find housing. Word is, she's turned down 3 millionaires in the past year because she thinks wealthy men are all shallow and self-centered.
I bet you $500,000 you can't marry her and stay married for a year. Marcus studied Sarah from across the room.
She wasn't conventionally beautiful by society's standards, not the type of woman who usually caught his attention. But there was something about the way she moved, the way she seemed completely comfortable in her own skin despite the judgmental looks from some of the other guests, that intrigued him. More than that, Derek's challenge had awakened something primal in him, that competitive drive that had pushed him to the top of his industry. You're on, Marcus said, extending his hand. But when I win, I want you to donate another $500,000 to whatever charity I choose. Derek shook his hand, grinning. And when you lose, you'll finally learn that money can't buy everything. The approach began innocently enough. Marcus accidentally bumped into Sarah near the silent auction table at exactly 9:32 p.m., causing her to spill a bit of her wine. He apologized profusely, offering to replace her drink, and she accepted with a warm smile that reached her eyes in a way that made him pause for just a moment. I'm Marcus, he said, extending his hand. I know who you are, Sarah replied, her handshake firm and confident. Marcus Holloway, the man who tears down old buildings and replaces them with luxury condos that nobody who actually lives in the neighborhood can afford. He was taken aback by her directness. Most people at these events either fawned over him or carefully avoided mentioning anything controversial. That's one way to look at it, he said carefully. Another way is that I'm revitalizing neglected areas and creating jobs. And making a fortune while displacing families, Sarah countered. But there was no malice in her voice, just honest observation. But I suppose that's the American dream, isn't it? Get yours and let everyone else figure out theirs. Instead of being offended, Marcus found himself fascinated. Here was someone who saw through his carefully constructed public image and wasn't afraid to challenge him. They talked for nearly an hour, debating urban development, wealth inequality, and social responsibility. Sarah was passionate and articulate, and Marcus found himself genuinely engaged in a way he hadn't been in years. By the time the gala ended at 11:15 p.m., he had her number and a date scheduled for Saturday afternoon. Over the next 3 months, Marcus pursued Sarah with a determination that surprised even himself. What started as a calculated strategy to win a bet slowly transformed into something he hadn't anticipated. Sarah introduced him to her world, the homeless shelters where she volunteered, the community centers where she taught financial literacy classes, the families struggling to survive in the city he had helped make unaffordable. He watched her comfort a crying mother who had just lost her apartment, saw her celebrate with a teenager who had gotten his first job, witnessed her fierce dedication to making a real difference in people's lives. She challenged him constantly, refusing to accept easy answers or empty promises. When he offered to write a large check to her nonprofit, she told him she'd rather he spent a day actually working at one of their shelters to understand what they did. When he showed up in expensive clothes, she handed him an apron and put him to work serving meals. When he complained about the menial tasks, She quietly reminded him that this menial work was how they maintained dignity and community for people society had forgotten. Somewhere between the shelter shifts and the long conversations over cheap diner coffee, Marcus began to change. He started seeing the city differently, noticing the people sleeping in doorways, the families crowding into emergency shelters, the working poor who couldn't afford the luxury apartments he built. And somewhere in that transformation, he realized he had fallen in love with Sarah, not because of the bet, but in spite of it. When he proposed at 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday evening, standing on the rooftop of one of the shelters where they had spent countless evenings talking, Sarah looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Are you sure about this, Marcus?" she asked softly. "I'm not the kind of woman men like you usually choose. I'm not going to lose weight to fit into your world. I'm not going to stop calling you out when you're wrong. I'm not going to be a trophy wife who smiles and stays quiet. I don't want you to be anyone but exactly who you are," Marcus said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "You've shown me what real strength looks like, what real beauty is. You've made me want to be a better man. Marry me, Sarah, not because I'm trying to win something, but because I can't imagine my life without you." She said yes, and they married 3 months later in a simple ceremony at the community center, surrounded by the families Sarah had helped and the volunteers who worked alongside her. Derek was there, watching with a mixture of surprise and respect as Marcus exchanged vows with genuine emotion in his voice. The bet seemed like a distant memory, something foolish and shallow that belonged to a different version of Marcus, a man he was no longer proud of being. The first 6 months of marriage were a honeymoon period filled with joy and discovery. Marcus had started redirecting his business model, working with Sarah's nonprofit to create affordable housing developments alongside his luxury properties. He established a foundation to provide job training and support services for homeless families. He spent his evenings not at exclusive clubs, but at community meetings, learning about the real needs of the neighborhoods where he developed properties. Sarah was proud of the changes he was making, and their love deepened with each passing day. But at exactly 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 6 months and 3 days after their wedding, Marcus's phone rang. It was Derek, his voice slurred with alcohol. "Hey, winner," Derek laughed. "You did it. You actually did it. 6 months married to the fat girl. Time to collect your prize money." Marcus felt his blood run cold. In his transformation, in falling genuinely in love with Sarah, he had completely forgotten about the original bet. "Derek, I don't want the money," he said quietly, glancing at Sarah sleeping peacefully beside him. "Too bad," Derek said. "A bet's a bet. I'll have the money transferred tomorrow. Congrats on being the best actor I've ever seen. You actually had me believing you fell for her." The call ended, and Marcus sat in the darkness, his heart pounding. He had never told Sarah about the bet. How could he? By the time he realized he actually loved her, it seemed irrelevant, a shameful secret from his old life that he wanted to forget. But Derek's call had brought it all crashing back, and Marcus knew with sickening certainty that he had to tell her the truth. He waited until morning, making her favorite breakfast and sitting across from her at their small kitchen table. The sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the soft curves of her face, and Marcus felt his heart breaking as he prepared to shatter everything they had built together. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice shaking. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." She looked up from her coffee, immediately sensing the gravity in his tone. "What is it?" He told her everything. About the bet, about Derek's challenge, about how he had approached her that first night with calculated intention. He watched her face transform from confusion to hurt to a kind of devastated betrayal that cut him deeper than any business failure ever had. "So our entire relationship started as a game?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just a challenge to you? The fat girl you could win over to prove how charming and irresistible you are?" "No," Marcus said desperately, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. "It started that way, I won't lie about that. But Sarah, everything changed. I fell in love with you. Everything I've done, all the changes I've made, that was real. You transformed me into someone I actually want to be." Sarah stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Tears streamed down her face, and Marcus had never seen her look so small, so hurt. "Do you have any idea how it feels to know that the person you love, the person you trusted completely, saw you as a bet? As a challenge? All those times I worried that I wasn't good enough for your world, That I was too different, too ordinary, and you let me feel that way while knowing the truth? I'm sorry, Marcus said, standing as well. I know I should have told you sooner. I know I was wrong. But please, Sarah, don't let this destroy what we have. I love you. That's real, I swear it. I need you to leave, Sarah said quietly, not meeting his eyes. I need time to think, and I can't do that with you here. Marcus wanted to argue, to fight for their marriage, but he saw the pain in her eyes and knew she needed space. He packed a bag and checked into a hotel, his heart heavy with guilt and fear. For 3 days, Sarah wouldn't answer his calls or texts. He felt like he was drowning, realizing too late what he stood to lose. On the 4th day, Derek called again. Heard Sarah kicked you out, he said, sounding pleased. Guess the bet's over. Sorry it didn't work out, but hey, you made it past 6 months. Money's in your account. I don't want your money, Marcus said coldly. I never wanted it. I want my wife back. Then you're a fool, Derek laughed. You could have walked away a winner. I was already a winner, Marcus said quietly. I just didn't realize it until I lost everything. He hung up and immediately transferred the full bet amount, plus matching funds from his own account, to Sarah's nonprofit. Then he did something he had never done before. He stopped trying to control the outcome. He wrote Sarah a letter, pouring out everything he felt, apologizing for the deception, explaining how she had changed him, and promising that whether or not she forgave him, he would spend the rest of his life proving that her influence on him was real and lasting. 2 weeks later, at 7:45 p.m. on a Wednesday evening, Sarah called. I got your letter, she said, and I saw the donation. Marcus, we need to talk. They met at the same diner where they had shared so many conversations during their courtship. Sarah looked tired, her eyes red from crying, but there was a strength in her posture that Marcus recognized and loved. She sat across from him and folded her hands on the table. I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to figure out if anything between us was real, Sarah said. I talked to the families you've helped, the people at the shelters, the staff at the community centers. Do you know what they told me? They said you changed, not gradually, not for show, but fundamentally. They said you listen now, that you see them as people, not problems. They said you're building something real, something that matters. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. I meant what I said in my letter. You showed me what it means to live a life that matters. I was so focused on winning, on accumulating wealth and success, that I forgot to be human. You taught me that, but you lied to me, Sarah said, her voice breaking. You let me fall in love with you while hiding something so fundamental about how our relationship started. I know, Marcus said, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting that I didn't tell you sooner. I should have been honest the moment I realized my feelings had changed. I was a coward and I hurt you because of it. But Sarah, please, don't let my mistake erase everything we built together. I love you. That's the truest thing I've ever known. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, tears streaming down her cheeks. I love you too, she finally said. And that's what makes this so hard. Because I want to trust you again. I want to believe that we can move past this. But Marcus, you have to understand, I spent my whole life being invisible, being dismissed because of how I look. And then you came along and made me feel seen, made me feel beautiful and valued. Finding out it started as a bet, it brought back every insecurity I've ever had. You are beautiful, Marcus said fiercely. You are the strongest, most compassionate, most incredible person I've ever met. And I'm sorry that my stupidity made you doubt that even for a second. I don't need you to forgive me right now. I just need you to know that I will spend every day proving to you that you can trust me again. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. I don't want this to be over, she said softly. But I need you to understand that trust is something you're going to have to earn back. No more secrets, no more half-truths. Complete honesty, even when it's hard. I promise, Marcus said, holding her hand like a lifeline. Complete honesty, always. They didn't fix everything that night. The wound was too deep for that. But they started the slow work of rebuilding trust, of creating a foundation based on truth rather than deception. Marcus moved back home a week later, and they began the difficult process of healing together. 6 months after the revelation, Sarah called Marcus at his office at 3:32 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. Can you come to the community center? She asked, her voice carrying a strange mix of emotions he couldn't quite identify. There's something I want to show you. When Marcus arrived, Sarah led him to the main hall, where a crowd had gathered. On the wall was a massive architectural rendering of a new development. mixed-income housing that incorporated community spaces, job training centers, and support services. At the bottom, in bold letters, it read, "The Sarah Chen Community Initiative, funded by the Holloway Foundation." "I didn't approve this," Marcus said, confused. "I know," Sarah smiled. "I did, using the money you donated. Marcus, you've spent the last year proving to me that people can change, that good intentions can become real actions. This project, this is us building something together, not as a bet, not as penance, but as partners who want to make a real difference." Marcus looked at the plans, at the faces of the families gathered around them, at his wife standing beside him with pride in her eyes. He thought about the man he had been, the shallow, arrogant businessman who saw people as transactions and relationships as games to win. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone he could barely recognize. "Thank you," he said quietly, pulling Sarah close. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." "Thank you for becoming someone worth believing in," Sarah replied, kissing him softly as they stood together, looking at the plans for a future they would build as true partners. Marcus realized that Derek had been wrong about one thing. The bet hadn't been about whether Marcus could make Sarah love him. The real challenge, the one he hadn't seen coming, was whether he could become the kind of man who deserved her love. And in losing the game he thought he was playing, he had won something far more valuable. A life filled with purpose, a love built on truth, and a partnership that would change not just his world, but the world around them. 2 years later, at the groundbreaking ceremony for the Sarah Chen Community Initiative, Marcus stood before a crowd of supporters, community members, and media representatives. Sarah stood beside him, 7 months pregnant with their first child, her hand resting on her belly. Derek was there too, having become one of their foundation's biggest supporters after witnessing Marcus's genuine transformation. "When I first met my wife," Marcus began, his voice carrying across the crowd, "I was a man who measured success in dollars and victories. I thought I could win her over, thought I could control the outcome like I controlled every other aspect of my life. But Sarah taught me that the greatest victories aren't the ones we win. They're the ones we earn through humility, through service, through opening our hearts to change. She taught me that real strength isn't about power or control. It's about compassion and commitment to something bigger than ourselves." He turned to Sarah, taking her hand. "This project isn't just about building homes. It's about building community, about creating opportunities, about recognizing the humanity in everyone. And it exists because one remarkable woman refused to let me stay the man I was, and challenged me to become the man I could be." As the crowd applauded and the first shovel broke ground on a project that would house and support hundreds of families, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here. It had started with arrogance and ended with humility. It had begun with a bet and transformed into a purpose. And through it all, Sarah had been his guide, his challenge, and his greatest gift. That night, as they lay in bed with Sarah's head resting on his chest, Marcus felt her hand find his. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "How we started, the bet, the deception, all of it." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question honestly. "I regret that I hurt you," he said finally. "I regret that I wasn't honest from the beginning. But do I regret that it led us here, to this moment, to this life we're building together? No. I just wish I had been worthy of you from the start." "You're worthy now," Sarah said, looking up at him. "And that's what matters. We all have the capacity to change, Marcus. You proved that. You chose to become better, and that choice makes all the difference." As Marcus held his wife, feeling their child move beneath his hand, he understood that the greatest bet he had ever made wasn't the one Derek had challenged him with that night at the gala. It was the bet he made on himself, the wager that he could change, that he could become more than his worst impulses and mistakes. And in winning that bet, he had gained everything that truly mattered: love, purpose, and a future built on truth and compassion. The man who had married Sarah on a dare was gone, replaced by someone who had learned that the greatest shock in life isn't what happens to us, but what we choose to become because of it.